It's podcast day. It's podcast day. Hey friends, welcome to the heyBrownBerry Podcast. I'm Mars. It's nice to have you here in my little corner of the internet. Welcome in. I am sitting in my craft room feeling really grateful for technology in this moment. I just finished a Zoom meeting with some of my dearest friends, some of my oldest friends, folks that I met the summer before my freshman year in college, and all these years later we are still a pretty tight-knit group, and it feels good to have the opportunity to chat with them. I'm sure many of you have heard about Zoom. It's an online web meeting platform, and we decided that we would start having a Sunday brunch. A Sunday brunch where we can get together and just chat about what's been happening for each of us and our families and reminisce a little bit. I love that we still laugh at some of the same things. So I hope that if it's available to you, you have a way to get together with some of the folks that you're used to chatting with and find a little bit of connection in these times where many of us are staying at home to help slow the spread of the COVID-19 disease and trying to keep as much normalcy, whatever that looks like. So this episode is just a bit of a catch-up for me. I think if you've watched the last couple episodes, you know they were themed. We had a swatch party and a frog pond party, so some making and unmaking by way of YouTube live episodes. Thank you to everyone who joined for those. Both are available on this channel that you can watch the replay. What I'm making right now is a sock, just a very simple Shorty sock. I'm using two different yarns, both from Babbles yarns. This is actually a top-down sock I'm knitting, so that's why it's got that weird in-between shape now where I've done the cuff and the heel flap, and I'm getting ready to continue on the foot. This is a pattern by Denise, who is Earthtonesgirl, the host of the Earthtonesgirl Podcast here on YouTube. And she also has an amazing Instagram feed. Follow her if you don't already. She's written a really great sock recipe for a pair of Shorty socks. And when I bought the pattern, obviously it was to support a very good friend of mine, but I also really wanted to support her effort to encourage people to be fearless with their sock knitting. And she's given them quite a tool by way of this pattern. It is somewhat of a quick project, unless you have long feet like me, because it's a short sock and it gives you all the parts that you need. And if you are new to sock knitting, she's got an excellent series of tutorial videos to support new or beginning sock knitters. So I really appreciated her making such a complete packaged resource. I am an experienced sock knitter in that I've made many pairs, I've designed some sock patterns, but I don't own a lot of Shorty socks, and I'm kind of eager to see what it's like to complete a pair of socks a little more quickly than my usual. The colors that I'm using here are, I think, a great combination of this Corriedale yarn. Grace, who is Van and Wilhelmille on Instagram, and she hosts the Babbles Traveling Yarns podcast out here on YouTube, is an excellent dyer. So these colors are just rich, and the Corriedale takes it beautifully. So there's like a deep purple, which is variegated, almost tonal, and then there's this beautiful teal and blue. I just decided to put them together because I love the colors and they're the same fiber, so I thought they would go well together. There's quite a few make-alongs happening right now. I spend a lot of time on Instagram, so when I say things like that, I typically mean I've seen on Instagram that there are a lot of make-alongs happening. There are also some that are being run in Ravelry groups. Are you participating in any of them? Are you finding that a good way to feel connected? I don't join them all. I'm always tempted to join them all, but I also tend to get a little bit more anxious if something feels like it has a deadline, and that's not a space that I want to be in right now. So I'm an excellent cheerleader, and I think for people who work well within a make-along or a themed series of projects, I think it's fantastic. I'm actually running one, the Stash Dive Challenge 2020. I'll put the hashtag here, and that's about diving back into our stash for materials that we've had for some time and making things with them. And if you follow the Stash Dive Challenge 2020 hashtag on Instagram, you'll see some beautiful projects, and you'll see that we have 4 different quarters of project types: socks, shawls, hats, and gifts. So I'm running that in the sense that I'm just encouraging people to join in and connecting with folks who are using the hashtag by ogling their projects, because that's one of my favorite things to do on Instagram, is to scroll through and see people's interpretations of things. It's fantastic. I'm really enjoying that, but I haven't been doing much in the way of my own joining make-alongs. I have, however, recently finished a test knit. I finished the sweater that is designed by Jimmy of JimiKnits, and I just want to show you a couple photos of it. It's the AllTerrain Sweater, and then I'll talk a little bit about it. I really enjoyed making that sweater. There are so many elements to it that brought back some of what I love about handmaids. First of all, it is a sweater that's knit in pieces, front, back, and sleeves, and it is seamed. So I was re-upping my mattress stitch game and my grafting game by way of this test knit. I haven't done a lot of sweaters. The ones that I have made primarily have been top-down seamless. I've done some color work. I have done seamed sweaters before, but they just didn't feature prominently in my project list. And I think that's going to change after this project, because maybe 8 or 9 years ago, I had a sweater that was pretty popular. It was a fully cabled cardigan with a big ribbed collar, and I made it out of a delicious yarn, and I loved it, but it was done in pieces as well. And I took 2 years to seam up that sweater. I literally left it sit because the idea of doing the single task of seaming up all of the pieces just was so daunting, and every time I thought about it, I would put it off. Have you ever done that? You know something needs to be done. It is the next step between you and wearing this item you've spent all this time making. But I just couldn't bring myself to do it until, I don't even know what spawned this frenzy, but it came to a point where I thought, I've got to get this done. And of course, typical me, I seamed it all in one session. Just every piece, did the whole thing, and was so happy when it was finished. I mean, it was, of course, a triumphant moment because it had been so long since I made it, and now I was finally able to wear it. Fast forward to now with the AllTerrain Sweater, I was ready for the seaming portion of the project. I was ready for wearing the sweater. I live in Florida, it's April, it's already hot, and still all I could think was, as soon as I get the seaming done, I'll be able to put it on and see how it really fits on me. And the mattress stitch and the grafting that I did in order to attach the pieces together was so meditative. I'd love to hear how you guys feel about this topic of seaming versus seamless. I don't think there's a right way when it comes to sweater making. I think there's a right way for each of us. But I so enjoyed the process of putting the pieces together. I think mostly because it was so repetitive that once I got a rhythm down with each section, it was nice to just focus in on that single task. And each time a section was attached to another section, I was that much closer to a finished object. I'll share some video with you of the mattress stitching steps and the grafting steps that I was doing. The shoulders were grafted together, and then I seamed up the sleeves because they were also knit flat, and then I'm trying to remember the order. So I put the front and the back together by seaming the shoulders, and then I actually stitched in the bound off portion of the sleeves into the armhole, but the sleeves themselves were still open at that point. Then I stitched up the sleeve from the cuff to the underarm. And then at the end I mattress stitched the two front and back pieces of the body together. And that was the perfect order. I really appreciate this pattern layout and this pattern format that Jimmy is about to release sometime soon, because it had so much in it that can be reused for other projects. Some of the other making that's really keeping me company is handspun, making yarn, creating different yarns with my fiber stash. I have been fortunate to have time. I am at home with my husband and both my girls, and currently not working outside of the house. I wasn't before this pandemic became a big part of our global life. So I'm fortunate that I do have stretches of time during the day that I can do things like sit down and spin a bobbin's worth of handspun. I've been working more on my wheel than my spindles lately. If I had to think about it, that's probably because I can do pretty long stretches on the wheel without, with some kindness to my body and without any strain. I can get some good yardage in. I probably will, just because I'm talking about it now, gravitate back toward my spindles, because there's also some beautiful repetition that happens when you're working with a spindle. But from the wheel, I was able to finally ply up my sweater spin yarn. So I'll give you a look at those. Now this is, in my opinion, this is one of my longest long-term projects so far with spinning. These skeins are 2-ply, and they are a mixture of fibers. All of the technical details about them are on my Ravelry page. I'm trying to be good about keeping details about my handspun yarns, yardage, fiber content, and so on, and how I've prepped or spun them. And this is a combination of several different fibers that I pre-planned for this project. And I'm calling it a sweater spin because I do intend to make this into a sweater. These two skeins are sort of the largest output in the plan. I did have some other fiber that was just maybe 10 or 20 grams, kind of a tester amount. But these are the main pieces of the sweater that will appear in the body and maybe on the sleeves as well. And you can see that I've done a 2-ply that ends up fractal in some places. And then there are some flashes of single color sections. It's pretty drapey, it's pretty light. There's a mix in here of BFL and some other British breeds, some alpaca and Romney, Shetland. One of the fibers had a lot of those different breeds within the braid that I bought, and then the others were combined with it. So it's really nice and drapey. I'm really happy about it. My plan, because I know some of you will ask, my plan is that I will combine this totally. I have about 260 grams of about a sport weight here. So I will combine these with a commercially produced yarn. I'm currently planning to use this yarn. So this is Brooklyn Tweed Loft. And you can see it's a really nice gray. It's a light gray. It's coming up a little bit dark just because of the lighting in the room, but it's a light gray. It's a woolen spun, so very lofty, very airy, spongy yarn. I've knit with this before. It's an American Targhee Columbia wool blend. Really love how it knits up, and my plan is that I will combine it with my Handspun. And I swatched. Are you proud of me? I swatched. So you can see there's a good bit of the loft in this top portion of the swatch, whereas on the bottom I was just swatching the Handspun itself, and this happened to be a section where some of the colors came together at one point, and then in another section it's kind of marled with the different breeds. So my generic thought is that I will do some striping in the sweater. How often I'll stripe in each type of yarn, how broad the stripes will be, is still to be determined and might actually be decided on the needles. I really want some flexibility in making this sweater. It will very likely be a pullover, and I think just because I'm in that mood, it will very likely be knit flat and seamed. I like the fact that when you knit flat, there's some forgiveness in the fact that when you're changing colors along the edge, whatever that looks like, even if it's not pretty, will get hidden in the seaming process. So that's appealing, and I don't mind purling. Is it okay to say that? Of course it is. Yeah, I don't mind purling, so knitting flat isn't daunting to me from that perspective. And how much I will put in of the loft is really going to determine how far this Handspun goes. I think the idea will be to use all of this, so I will use the other yarn as a filler. Are you spinning lately too? Are you finding that it's bringing any comfort or any good repetition into your space? I'd love to hear about your spinning projects or what you have planned. I'm stash diving and falling back in love with my fibers. I actually just recently finished this East Frisian. Put it here so you can see. This is from Abundant Earth Fiber. Maybe I can turn it right side up so you can read. Their signature roving blend. Hang on. That's better. So this is a signature roving blend from Abundant Earth Fiber. I got this when I was traveling with my friend Jessica out in the Pacific Northwest last fall. So I met the owner of this shop, and Jessica kindly gifted me this fiber. I spun some of it on my spindle. That's this little mini skein over here, and the rest of it on my wheel. And I'm pretty happy with consistency between the two. I did most of it on my wheel, as you can see, but I decided that a 2-ply would work well for this, and I love how it came out. Pretty happy with that. So one of the measures for me One of the measures of my success with spinning is looking at how much fiber I started with, in this case 100 grams worth of fiber, and how much handspun I end up with, because that kind of tells me, was there any waste? Did I lose any fiber in the drafting process? And in this case, I think all but 3 or 4 grams ended up as usable yarn. I'm really happy about that. It's a 2-ply as well. That's kind of my standard. I'm in that phase of my spinning life where I'm settling into a yarn weight that I spin very naturally, and it's a yarn weight that I like for how I think I'll use it. Between socks, sweaters, or accessories, a 2-ply works great for me. And the properties of the fiber tend to do the rest. So this, for example, was a very airy fiber. It was, I spun it semi-woolen, meaning I left some air in the plies as I was drafting them, so it's really spongy and soft and not as drapey, but very bouncy. So I'm really looking forward to getting that on the needles or on the crochet hook. Who knows? As recently as yesterday, I got myself into quite the rabbit hole. Where are my sewers out there, quilters, those who love fabric and thread? I am trying to join your ranks in a learning way, in a way that I can try new skills without a lot of pressure as to exactly what I'll produce. I have made a garment, I have sewn project bags, and smaller things like that, but I'm focusing right now on honestly just being comfortable at my sewing machine. It is not something that I have done for many, many years, like knitting, so every new sewing adventure puts me in a very humble place and reminds me that the only way through certain projects is to make a bunch of mistakes and be okay with them, to unpick, to start over. Those are becoming very familiar to me as I try these new skills. I have the good fortune of being close enough to a quilt shop. For me, it's close. We live in a rural area, so close for me is a relative term. It's just under an hour away from my house. But we were having what was called a monthly block of the month club meeting. Once a month we would get together at the quilt shop, and the owners there did a fantastic job of creating kits that allowed us to learn quilt making skills and feel a sense of togetherness because the skill levels were across the board. I went to get the blocks I was able to complete so far so I could show you. I believe this was our first one. Now, for those of you who quilt, I'm sure you recognize right away the types of blocks that are in here. This is a 12 by 12 square that is pieced together from 9 smaller squares, and those 9 squares have additional blocks in them. So it's a lot of pieces put together kind of like a puzzle. This is my first, I would say, official quilt block that I've ever made. I had no experience before this in things like half square triangles and, you know, precisely measuring out pieces in order to create a pattern. All of that was very new to me when I started this. And that was our January block. In February, we did this one. And between the two of them, I can already see improvement. For one, in my patience. I think I was so nervous at the beginning about messing it up that I was not very patient with myself. This February block, which was our second one, I felt more comfortable. I took my time. I can look at it and see that my corners in different squares match up much better already. So that's how I've come to appreciate trying new things with sewing, is that I'm going to stumble, I'm going to stub my toe, I'm going to do it incorrectly, but if I don't let that stop me, I can see improvement and the progress is tangible, and I love that. I am the type of sewer that needs to go to my machine and do something that has no pressure, no deadline, and no specific outcome before I do things that do have a specific outcome. It lets me get comfortable being at the machine and remember the small things in sewing that help you not to waste thread and keep things accurate. So a lot of times sitting at the machine and stitching together just a couple pieces of fabric is my way of warming up, sort of like exercise. So I've done that in combination with learning a skill for patchwork. So patchwork for me rings all my bells as a frugal maker. I consider myself to be quite frugal when it comes to things like using up scraps, using what I have, rehoming things from other folks instead of buying new. These are all things I aspire to. I don't do them all the time and I'm not perfect at it, but making patchwork fabrics is a way to reclaim scraps from other projects. Very appealing to me. But I hadn't done it before in a very organized way. So I went on YouTube and I found some great tutorials. I will link the channel that has a tutorial series to match how I was making these patchwork blocks. So this is an example of one of the first ones that I started with when I was doing this yesterday. You could see that there's a lot of very straight lines. I'm using up different types of fabric that were scraps, which I love. But there's not a lot happening in terms of style. I was just getting used to how to piece things together and do some good seaming. And then I started getting a little more creative. You know, I've got pieces in here that don't have straight edges yet, but as I learned while doing this, something like this can become a straight line if I want it to when I add the next piece of fabric and seam or stitch that on there. Then I started getting a little braver in combining blocks. So this whole section was made and then this whole section was made, and then I found a way to bring them together. And if you look at the back, I don't mind showing you the back pieces. All my stitching here. I have my seams going in different directions. A couple of them are pressed open, but that's all part of learning what works well for me. I saw that there was a really good tip about letting the fabric kind of tell you which way the seams want to lay and be pressed down. And I actually found that worked for me. There were seams that would just naturally be leaning in one direction, and when I pressed them in that direction, it made for a beautiful flat finish. And then this last block is a combination of several smaller blocks. And you can see in this one that I was getting a bit better at the really small strips and crumb-like pieces. This is based on a crumb quilt format. And then I even just found a way to put together a section of fabric where I didn't have very much to work with on one side, but I folded over this piece and then just did some top stitching on it for it to be a bit decorative. And actually this, because it's hemmed, it's folded over and then stitched, is a little bit textural. It kind of stands off the fabric a little bit and it works as a joining piece. And you can see that I have even tiny little block sections in there. As I look at these, it is wonderful to remember where these fabrics were originally used. I have some in here that just bring me such nostalgia. They have memories attached to them. As an example, this fabric here, the blue one with the dark spots, this used to be a white pair of pajama pants way back when my daughters were young homeschoolers. They took a sewing class, and a couple of those classes were done here at our house, and they were taught by our homeschool group leader, and the girls learned how to make pajama pants. And after many years after those were made, I pulled out these pants, and they were white with the black patterning. And I just got in a tizzy one day about dyeing the pants. So I dyed the whole thing blue, and then since then I've been using that fabric. I've been cutting pieces from it to put into project bags, and then I had some scraps that I could put into these patchwork blocks. So there's lots of good memories there. Actually, the lightish, like pinky red fabric is another pair of pajama pants from that decade ago sewing class. So all the memories of the projects that were live in here, and it is so satisfying to me to have these scraps become something else. Now, what these patches will become is still to be determined. I know that there's several options for me to cut these into specific sized blocks. I could cut them into, say, 6 by 6 inch blocks and use those in an actual quilt. That's pretty appealing. I could use them as patches of fabric on a bag. I could put them into something like a skirt, because as I piece this together, it's like it's made another fabric, another piece of fabric. So I love that. Little techniques about how to save thread, how to get the most out of your pieces. I found things like that in some different YouTube tutorials, and that really speaks to me. It's about less waste. It's about repurposing all the things that just light me up. If you've got any favorite tutorials, always feel free to send them my way. I'm such a fan of the way the internet allows us to learn. I think it's fantastic. I hope some of these projects have inspired you. I'm really happy that I could sit with you for a little while and just talk about what I've been making, and hopefully hear back from you about what you're making. So I will end it there for this time around. Thanks for being part of this episode. I love, love, love having you here, so please come back, and I will see you again next time. Bye for now. Mwah.